Hi, welcome back. So, 2 notes before we start with the panel session. If you want to have some water, you have your water bottles, and you can refill them in the expo area, or is it behind the expo area? There are the tanks where you can refill your bottles, so we are really environmentally friendly. And the second note is that all the tables have electricity, so if you want to charge your devices, you can find the adapters under the table. But now it is time for a panel discussion about PES governance structures and the role of social partners for PES. And this will be moderated by Mr. Anton Eckersley, who is the Director of International Relations in Ingeus. So please, Anton, the job of moderating is now yours, and we are really looking forward for this discussion.
Great, thank you very much indeed, and a very warm welcome to you all here in the beautiful city of Tallinn, and to our global audience, whatever time of day it is for you, a very warm welcome too. Before we start our session, I'd like for us to have our first poll. So if you could go into your Slido, you will see the first question. And the first question is, because we're in the room that is the black box, it's a slightly out of the box question. And the question is, which mobile phone do you use? Which smartphone do you use? And you have a little choice there. You have Nokia, BlackBerry, Samsung, Apple, or other. Now, bear with us here. You will see the connection between this and the topic that we are discussing today, which is governance. So we'll just leave a little bit of time for the questions to come through. So please go on to your Slido, and the question is, which smartphone do you have? Quel smartphone possédez-vous? And we have Nokia, BlackBerry, Samsung, Apple, or other. Great, okay. So whilst we're waiting for the results to come through, we've heard from our keynote speakers today about some of the challenges that public employment services are facing currently, particularly demography, the very rapid changing technology that we're seeing, deglobalization in many senses now. We've got supply chains changing and becoming a lot more regional, and overall, the labor markets are rapidly moving into new areas of digitalization in particular. We often talk in our networks about best practice. So how, as public employment services, how as employment service ecosystems, we can develop the kinds of programs that will support people into sustainable employment. But very rarely do we talk about the what's. By that, we're talking about how we can use governance in particular to ensure that we get the right kind of results for our customers, and also in terms of the social dialogue. We heard from Mr. Lee this morning how social dialogue in particular is an important part of the development of public employment services globally. So let's just return now to the questions there. We've got, which smartphone do you have? So, quel smartphone possédez-vous? And we've got Apple coming out on top. So obviously we've got some very wealthy public employment services out there. Samsung, I'm a Samsung man myself. Other, and Nokia at 0%, BlackBerry at 0%. Back in 2007, Nokia had a market share of over 50%. Today, it's Samsung and Apple tend to be the most popular, with Huawei and other Chinese brands as well becoming more popular. Now, why is that relevant to us? Well, if Nokia was the most popular brand in 2007, today it's number 11. What happened between 2007 and today? Well, that really comes down to governance. It's the challenges of governance and the difficulties that companies like Nokia had in terms of thinking about the right kind of strategic vision, how they invested their money to ensure the best results, how they brought together the different stakeholders. We forget that most mobile phones have over 30 different components in them. So how do you bring those components together to ensure that you can produce a product that your customers will want, that will be successful? So this is a really good example of how governance can and cannot work. So if we consider our public employment services as manufacturers of smartphones, we can see that some public employment services have been very successful over the last 40 to 50 years. Others perhaps less so in tackling some of the labor market challenges that we experience. We have put together today to support our endeavors a Rolls-Royce panel of experts, starting with Mwasikakata, who is head of labor market services in the ILO. We have Peep Peterson, who is the president of the Estonian Trade Union Congress. I'm delighted to also welcome back, because I haven't seen her in a long time, Marie-Thérèse Fombona, who is in charge of international relations at Le Forem, which is the Belgian Wallonian Public Employment Service. And last but not least, in presence, we have Dr. Mazza from the world-renowned Johns Hopkins University in the States, and she is a labor market expert. And I am hoping that we have online Mr. Azirruan bin Arifin from the Malaysian Public Employment Service, SOCO. So hopefully we can link him up online. Sadly, the Director General from Mali is not able to be with us today. And here we have Mr. Azirruan. Hello from... Hello, wonderful. Good to meet you. You're on mute. Hopefully we will be able to, we can't hear you, but hopefully we will be able to hear you very soon. Okay, right, so without further ado, I'd like to start our questions, and I'd like to start with you, Michael, if I may. When we talk about social dialogue, we talk very often about it as being a kind of post-war construct, so Convention 88. But actually, we know that public employment services, the genesis of public employment services, goes back much, much earlier than that. And in fact, the genesis lies with trade unions and employer bodies. So in many respects, what we're seeing is the public employment services joining the employer bodies and the trade union bodies, rather than the other way around in terms of social dialogue. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this has come about, so that the audience here can get a background idea of the development, the evolution of social dialogue?
Thank you, Anton. Indeed, employment services, the beginning of employment services in the end of 19th century, started, of course, from the situation where people were just looking for jobs, or tramping, as it was called then, to a situation where there were, the trade unions organized themselves to provide services to their members, and this. In many cases, it was really to sort of solve some sort of a class conflict, where trade unions would organize members so as not to prevent the depression in wages, to manage supply of labor on the labor market, and to improve the conditions of their members. And then on the other side, you also had employers who would organize against services for their own members. And then you had also the various trade associations, the guilds, who would also organize, employment exchanges, as it used to be called then, for various people in the labor market. And this went on for a while. And as employment services were being developed, the government did not come in immediately. So basically what started was really municipal governments they offering services at the local level. And then later on, the government started providing government-led employment services or employment exchanges, not through their own structures, but by working with either trade unions or trade associations and working with employers' organizations. Now, private employment agencies also preceded the formal government-led implementation of employment services. And until the just prior to the World War I, and also after the World War I, that's when there was really an attempt to try and provide some organized, mobilization of servicemen for the war, but also the reintegration of the servicemen after the war. And at that moment, the main concern was then the apparent abuse of workers by the private providers. That's why there was a move towards a strong provision of public employment services by the public.
For our Estonian colleague.
I think I stop there for now.
Great. Okay, so I think the point there really is that social dialogue has very long roots, and that the roots of that social dialogue are with trade unions and employer bodies. And I think that's important to recognize, because I think that reshapes some of the debate and some of the discussion that we have around social dialogue today. If I can move to you, Peep. Tutukasa is a relatively young public employment service. We heard Milas talk today about the fact that your 20th anniversary is shortly coming up, so you're not looking bad for 20. Can you tell us a little bit about why in Estonia you chose a tripartite approach to social dialogue, and how that has evolved over the last 20 years?
I think it all starts from the fact that there are workers and there are employers in the society, and then they are like equal partners in this business to develop the economy and so on. So both sides recognized first the risk that yes, people can stay unemployed. They also recognize the risk that some companies are going to bankruptcy, and then they just wanted to cover them. And then actually the trade unions and employers came to the government saying that, okay, we need these kinds of funds to. So in the beginning, it was like only gathering, the money and saving it, and then when it was needed, it was distributed. But afterwards, 2008, when we had this kind of liberal reform of working relations, new draft of law coming out, then actually just to accept this flexibility and balance it with security, we said that, okay, now the funds we had already, it was like ownership of 3. We said that, okay, now it's time to give also the services and everything else to this fund. And as we were sitting already there, we trusted it. We knew that we are able to manage it well, and we have done so. So this is the main idea. And when we heard that social dialogue is kind of a time-wasting kind of thing for some, then when the social partners are the decision makers themselves, this is the social dialogue. It's not just dialogue. It's like a decision making. Three parties, consensus needed, and so on.
So in an Estonian context, the employers and the unions have a very real say in shaping the policy as well as monitoring the policy.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And it was really good to have the system, relatively good independence. It's not exactly part of the state. It's a kind of public entity. We have our reserves, quite a lot of independence, and then especially during the pandemic, it was really fast. I think it took 1 week for us to agree on the model we are going to use based on IT, which was there, which was well financed because the financing is independent. And then we were able to deliver first payments for this Kurzarbeit kind of thing. I think it was like in 3 weeks. It was in the pocket of people.
Yeah, great. Now, I'm hoping the link to Malaysia is going to be working because we know as well that the public employment service in Malaysia is also relatively young in global terms. And if I'm correct, the genesis of PERKOSO was in injury management initially, so it wasn't in what we would traditionally call a public employment service. Can you talk us through, please, some of the challenges that you have faced in terms of your social dialogue and how social dialogue in Malaysia has evolved over the years to meet some of those challenges? I'm afraid we can't hear you yet, so I'm hoping that the technology will come. We may come back to you in that case. So I will move swiftly on to Belgium, if I may, and to Marie-Thérèse. In many ways, Belgium has what we would call a classic tripartite model that is well embedded in the public employment service and more generally within Belgium. Can you talk us through how social dialogue with Le Forem is shaped and how the social partners are involved in shaping policy but also monitoring and evaluating the operations of Le Forem?
Oui, merci Anton. Vous passez donc d'un service public d'emploi relativement jeune à une situation où
Yes, in Belgium,
la concertation sociale. Donc,
we have long-standing traditions
pour cette raison-là, parce que la
concerning the social dialogue. I'm really pleased today to be a member of this panel discussion. We have a well-structured system.
c'est au niveau de la société en général qu'elle est structurée, mais aussi, bien entendu, au niveau de notre service.
And this pertains to the society at large, and also for our public employment service.
Culturellement très ancré.
Likewise,
Contrairement, par exemple, aux pays nordiques,
we have long cultural traditions. In North European countries, this is more formal setup. For us, not so formal.
de façade qui se limiterait par exemple à demander des avis ou à transmettre uniquement de l'information pour la forme. Parce que
It doesn't only mean that we ask for the opinion of a training. Yes, we organize all this if necessary. You are aware of it, but
Et donc, j'imagine qu'au cours de notre discussion, je pourrais...
But in social dialogue and cooperation of social partners has become mature already in Belgium. I would like to highlight some of the major developments.
Notre modèle, notre approche, elle est relativement maximaliste dans le service public d'emploi.
We want to achieve maximum results at our PES.
Et le comité de justice.
in many different aspects.
Il est quadripartite dans sa composition en fait, puisqu'il y a
We have our steering committee.
des représentants.
There are 4 parties to it. The employers, the employees are represented there. Our employers are represented by the Central Association, the employees through the trade unions. Our representation and 2 representatives from the Wallon region government. The aim of it is to protect public interests and to comply with legislation. So that's a sort of maximalist approach. On the other hand, our wish was to give social partners real decision-making power in our governing bodies. Be they representatives of the trade unions or the employers, we wish to give them real decision-making powers as well as rights to vote.
Une bipartite finalement au niveau du pouvoir de décision par les employeurs et par...
So this is a dual approach. On one hand, employers, on the other hand, employees and their representatives accordingly. I would like to draw your attention to another aspect, a potential risk. Our board or managing board has to make decisions on the topics where employers and employees are essential stakeholders. I'm not going to go into detail by describing the system. We now go to Malaysia.
So I'll repeat the question. We know that both SOCO and PERKOSO are relatively youthful public employment services and an unemployment insurance body. Can you talk us through how social dialogue has developed and evolved to meet some of the challenges that Malaysia and the Malaysian labour market has faced over the last 20 years or so?
All right, Anton, can you hear me?
We can indeed, now? Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I think this is one thing that, all of us realize after the COVID-19 pandemic, the knowledge of technical, digital, I think is very key. So to actually answer to that, Anton, PERKOSO in actual fact has been many years in Malaysia around, and just to inform everyone that last year we have actually celebrated our 50th years of in present in Malaysia. It's just that we started off with a compensation-based platform where PERKOSO was tasked to provide social protection for employees against employment injury and invalidity. So that has actually happened 50 years ago. But however, along the way, the initial public employment services framework has actually started off in 2008. But it's just that the function has been given through providing employment services through the case management under the Return to Work program. Here is basically the beneficiaries of PERKOSO, those actually involved with employment injury and all that. They will go through a process of rehabilitations, and after rehabilitation, they will go through the process of giving them some expertise or new experts, new kind of competencies for them to be able to get into the working life again. And that has been done since 2008. And right after that, the PES model has been expanded to workers to include the loss of employment to the implementation of our employment insurance system in 2018. And since then, because when we actually do come out with the employment insurance system, we do based on the OECD model, which is unemployment benefit, job brokerage, and training, which labor market analytics as well. And from there, we have actually grown to more than just a compensation base, where we put in the requirement of PES, where we start looking into placement job and so on and so forth. And in doing this, I'm glad and happy to say that we have been working together with other ministries, with the NGOs, with the locals, jurisdiction, the state's jurisdiction, and so on and so forth. So having been 50 years in the market, PERKOSO is not really new for the employer and employees. So it's kind of easy for us to actually play our role, expanding our role within the PES itself. And leveraging in the structure that we have from the social protection perspective, we have about 600 plus officers, the employment services officers throughout the countries. So by having this, we can actually have personalized services to the job seekers or the people of Malaysia. And in 2020, we gone further by the implementation of our portal, My Future Job portal. And this, when we implemented the My Future Job portal, we also do this together with a strong strategic partnership across the NGOs and other jurisdictions. So that basically the experience that we have actually gone through. And in my opinion, we have the advantage of having, implement through smoothly, because we do have the information in terms of social security, and for us to actually continue and enhance doing PES is kind of easy to actually do that. It's just that we need to keep on doing the promotion and making sure that the public understand what is PES is all about.
No, absolutely, which is a really important point. And I'd like to come back later to the My Future's Job portal, because I have had a little peek at the portal, and I'm a big fan of that. So we can talk about that related to the future of work. Before then, I'd like to touch base with you, Jacqueline, and talk about the fact that when we discuss governance very often, it's seen as very much an issue for the global north. But actually the global south too has a very rich heritage of social dialogue. But the challenges are very different, as we know. Can you talk us through some of the challenges that you see, both in terms of the lack of work formality, for example, and how that affects social dialogue, and some of the really good examples that you've come across both in Africa and perhaps Latin America?
Happy to do that. And I think often when I travel to Global South, I have to first look at how the labor market isn't operating well. That we're talking about very few open job listings, often relatively disorganized private sector in terms of its own skill articulation, and as well as not large classic manufacturing base, which is how many public and employment services started in the developed countries. So often the concept of social dialogue is not the one they use. They actually partnering with the various actors, in essence, to improve their ability to get employers to openly list jobs, to involve employers directly in the placement and job vacancies, because you're changing both the way the public sector operates and the private sector simultaneously. So I think of the case of Honduras, which most public employment services in the Global South suffer from very limited resources. So because of that, they often may have a reputation of not covering very much of the market. And that was the case in Honduras. But without more resources, what they did was to partner with the business associations who did have, particularly in the textile area, they did have turnover and need for workers. But business employers would rather walk into a business association and register their job than in a public institution. So they essentially, without exchanging money, allowed the business association to register openings in the public service, and you have a dramatic, in 5 to 7 years, you have a jump from 5,000 job listings nationally to 20,000 job listings nationally. That is, they begin to change the market by working with each other. And it is, again, this idea of the strategy with employers to get them to operate more openly. And the same thing happened in Jamaica. When I first went to Jamaica and they showed me their electronic database, they literally had not one job listed. So they had to have a different strategy. The tourism sector certainly had job turnover, and it was changing that relationship with the employers, going to the employers, that really changed the dynamic, and now they're up to, in the thousands of job listings now by having an employer outreach strategy.
Right, so we've got a really good example there of some innovative approaches to increasing the range of jobs on offer, and therefore the access that you're giving to job seekers away from simply the traditional public employment service job matching.
Exactly, because I think particularly in the Global South, the ones who are more disadvantaged are the ones who don't have the contacts to, in essence, job hunt through their cousin or their brother. And so the real value of increasing open job listings is for the lower part of the market, and to make that part work, and to begin to move as you can from the informal to the formal sector. So many public employment services, particularly in Latin America, that we have found that they are able to, in essence, increase the formal job of the person who comes into the service, because they have access to information that they wouldn't have had on the street.
Wonderful. No, that's great. Thank you. Mr. Lee spoke in particular about the PES response to the crisis. And of course, we know that many countries had not really fully recovered even from the global financial crisis. Peep, I'd like to come to you. Can you talk us through some of the steps that the social partners in Estonia took to try to mitigate against some of the problems in both of those crises? We were talking there about, in particular, about resilience and the ability to try and future-proof, if that's the right word, labour markets for future crises, of which we seem to have rather a few at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, actually, it just PERKOSO was founded 2002 or something like that, and then of course it was quite a sunny years of starting, but we already had one big crisis before '98, when actually we felt that something is missing on the picture. When the big financial crisis came, the situation was that the resources were not big enough. We still had nice reserves, but they were not big enough to cover all this period. And then just during the crisis time, we had to bring up the fees. Workers are paying in and the employers are paying in, and this was kind of counter effect. You know, this was not exactly what is the smart thing to do when there's a crisis. And that's why we are learning. One thing is that the reserves have to be like enough. You really have to bring them up during the good days. This was one lesson, and the second was, of course, what especially trade unions took in. It was that relatively small working market, labor markets we have, like 700,000 people right now. We lost approximately 100,000 of working hands during this crisis time. It means that, you know, we didn't pay enough, we didn't keep the connection to Kassa with these people. They just disappeared, they stayed at home, or they left to other countries, and this is huge. And now, during the last boom, our employers were really you know, asking, hey, where are the people? We can't operate, the people are missing. And then now we have agreed on the separate system that, you know, how long we are going to pay the benefits. It depends on the market situation. In boom times, it's going to be less. In crisis time, when people really need this money and they are not so capable to find a job, then actually we are prolonging it. And this is kind of anti-cycle system, of course, but it depends on how much reserves we have, or how easy it is to take a loan, for example, for these reasons. It's also an option, but we have been working on reserves.
Yeah. So having that level of independence from central government has been a very important part in your ability to move swiftly. Similar in many respects, I suspect, to the Bundesagentur in Germany.
Especially when actually, you know, when the reserves are growing a lot, of course the government sees that, okay, there's billion euros somewhere standing, and they are like, you know, they want to grab it. They have so many political issues to solve, and then actually the employers and the trade unions are saying, no, don't touch it. Of course, we have agreed on something that, you know, the state is managing our reserves, but still, you know, still these are our reserves. We are asking, hey, state has so much reserves, it's less than our reserve. Where is our money? Please give it back, show me. So we have been fighting for that independence constantly.
So we see in a classic tripartite model, Michael, that you know, public employment services and the social partners have a great deal of autonomy. They can be nimble, they can move fairly quickly. The other model, perhaps the more common model, what we would call the top-down agency model, is quite prevalent in other parts of the world. Do you think that PES that operate under that particular model are a little less nimble, perhaps, when it comes to crisis management? Are there any pluses or minuses to that model compared with the more classic tripartite model?
Thank you, Anton. Yes, it's not straightforward though. It depends on in terms of which geographical regions. Our study that we did a couple of years ago in Africa and the Middle East, there was a sort of a general trend that the employment services that seem to have more independence a bit, which you still classify as top-down, I mean as executive agency or top-down, but with relatively more independence from the main employment ministry, tended to have a bit more services, more sophisticated services, and more personalized, services and offered to job seekers, and therefore more responsive. But at the global level, the situation is nuanced. It being really classical public employment service may not necessarily lead to more, independence in practice. But in general, indeed, public employment services that have a tripartite board that are independent from government tend to have to make decisions quicker. They tend to have more reach consensus quickly, and as we had, they had reached consensus in 1 week in terms of the model to use during the crisis, which would not be the case in a situation where you don't have that independence, that togetherness. So nevertheless, we see models like the UK, which is practically top down, but being more efficient than some of the, in some respects, and maybe having more, the independent discussions and negotiations in terms of reaching out decisions than some of those who are on paper really supposed to be tripartite and classic tripartite models. So I would say that there are many things to look at. It could be also how the governance is organized within the institution, how the stakeholders, reach out. There are many ways of conducting a social dialogue. It's not only through the tripartite boards. There could be in some institutions where you have general social dialogue structures, like the consultative, what they call the employment consultative councils, where different aspects of employment and labor are discussed and can be agreed upon. And therefore, one has to look at the situation and basically see what are the key ingredients that would really promote this kind of discussions and also consensus building in terms of decision making.
So the key word there in many respects is that consensus, that social legitimacy, I think you're saying. If I can come back to you, Mr. Azirruan, we know in Malaysia that the percentage of people who are trade union members is relatively low. We're looking at around 6% or so, I think. But they're still considered very important partners within the wider social dialogue with SOCO and PERKOSO. Can you talk us through how that social partnership worked during the recent COVID crisis?
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Anton. Yeah, that's a good question. I think before I can actually explain that in detail, I need to also explain to you how does the governance structure that we have in PERKOSO Malaysia. PES itself actually comes under the PERKOSO, the employment social security, and in PES, in EIS, Employment Insurance Services, we do have our own board members, and in our board members, actually there's a representative of employers and also the trade unions employees, and the board member that we have under EIS also reports to the board member in Social Security, PERKOSO. And again, in PERKOSO, the board member would also consist of the representative from both sides, the employer and the employees, which means that the trade union as well as the employers association. So within, if you actually look from the governance perspective, itself has been built within the tripartite model itself has been built in inclusiveness of these trade unions. All right, that is from the governance perspective. So any policies and all that has been discussed and has been trashed out and has been deliberated together with them. And on top of that, PERKOSO itself actually reports to Ministry of Human Resource. That is where the perspective of the government itself. So you can see the whole structure as actually inclusive of everyone. Now, that in terms of the structure. In terms of activities, we do involve with the employers and employee a lot. I mean, like for example, if we talk about employer, whenever we actually do carnivals, when we want to actually locate and find, try to match the job with the job seeker, we will organize a carnival of jobs, where this is where we invited all the companies, the employer, to be part of the programs. They will come in, they will advertise the vacancies, they will actually manage the interviews, and immediately, if they're able to find the suitable candidates, they will issue the letter of offer immediately. That's how we actually did it. So then the job seeker will go back feeling satisfied that they have actually got a place. So that's how we actually implement that. And of course, whenever we issue a policy, for example, we will involve with the players, employer. We will actually issue a concept paper, so on and so forth, so that for them to actually be able to communicate and provide us their opinions in order for us to finalize any policy development. So that is a bit in terms of sharing. So if I've actually explained it effectively, so the structure itself has actually involved tripartite model as well.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's very clear. Marie-Thérèse, I'd like to come to you now in terms of how Le Forem managed to use social dialogue and leverage social dialogue during the recent pandemic.
Oui, je voulais peut-être signaler aussi que les partenaires sociaux, vous l'avez compris,
I would like to mention one thing. As you understood, the social partners,
mais avant même de parler
in principle,
pour qu'elle ait un impact sur le long terme, elle doit se baser sur des
enjoy the same level as all the member staff at our WAPES. So the knowledge, the expertise of the people is the most important factor for us. The same pertains to the social partners. During the crisis, in order to respond to the question you asked me, so during the crisis, we try to combat the shortage of labor because people, due to this pandemic, transited from one sector to another. We organized roundtable discussions, invited 6 major partners to these roundtable discussions in order to get a full overview of the crisis situation and together with them to draft action plans in order to combat this shortage of workforce and to help those who have lost their jobs as well. So readiness to cooperate is vital in our organization.
À savoir V pour volatile, U pour uncertain, donc incertain, C pour complex, A pour ambiguous. Et moi, j'ai envie de créer un nouveau vocable en parlant de à aucun moment de l'histoire.
Yeah, very often this volatile, uncertain, ambiguous abbreviation VUA is used. Developments happen very rapidly recently, and to keep pace of these developments is a difficult task for institutions. It's not enough for public PES to act. We therefore need corrective measures, dialogue, opportunities to share our thoughts of social partners in the free environment and as quickly as possible. This is the way we try to act during the crisis. Our attempt is to make this type of activity more efficient in the future. We have to transform our work methods. We know that we are experiencing a major transition and evolution of the labor market worldwide. ja me räägime siin nüüd institutsionaalsest arengust, mille
dialogue tends to follow some of the major economic and social developments as opposed to lead them and to shape them. I'd like very briefly just to step back a little bit and just to take a little bit of a pulse for our next poll. We're going to see globally and here in the audience what kind of public employment services family you belong to, and I think the poll will be coming up if all is okay. So if you can go back to Slido, the questions are going to focus on what governance family your public employment service belongs to, and we have a choice of 4, so we're talking about a classic tripartite model, so that would be very much, in many respects, an Estonian or a Le Forem model. A top-down agency model, and Michael touched on that. UK, Ireland, Singapore, to some degree, are very much top-down agency models where the agency has some flexibility from the ministry, but is quite closely connected. The ministry tends to hold most of the cards and most of the power in terms of policy shaping and operations. One model we haven't really talked about yet, and that's the bottom-up local stakeholder model, and certainly the US, I think, would be probably the best example of that, where local community boards tend to manage the governance of local and regional geographies, and last but not least, local community-based models. And we see these generally in countries where you have a very light amount of government, or you have community groups that support employability and skills. And I'm thinking here in particular of faith-based groups in countries like Canada, US, many countries in Africa too. So those are the 4 models: a classic top-down, bottom-up, or local community-based models. So if you could go on to Slido and let us know what model your public employment service tends to operate on, that would be great. We touched on the local community model in particular, Jacqueline, and we don't see a great deal of that in the global north, but it is more and more popular in the global south, particularly, as I said, where the government doesn't have a very strong imprint. Can you talk to us about some of the examples perhaps that you have seen of community models, and perhaps some of their strengths for certain geographies?
I'm happy to, and I looked at your 4 models, and I have to say, when we talk even in the Global South about local community models, we often are talking about them in combination with some of the other models. For example, Brazil has its public employment services, one of the few employer and public sector model at the state level, but they have contracted out to a community, to an NGO in the northeast of Brazil. That is, the entire public employment service is run by an NGO in the probably one of the most difficult areas of Brazil, and is a much better performer because they are able to use performance standards with them. I think as well in Uganda, where the ILO had sent me just before COVID began, and there they in Kampala, in the urban area, you have a municipal-built employment center, which is drawing youth in particular, because they created a model which mirrors the way youth get together. And they have workshops on IT, along with the ability to job search, so that they, by combining municipal resources and local NGOs, and they bring in those local community groups or bring in employers to have a much more, I think, dynamic community-based center. So I think that there are so few actors in the Global South that you must use those partners who are already in the productive sector. And I think the real challenge is in rural areas, particularly rural areas with high levels of informality. In Africa, we'll say 90% of the rural area is informal. And even in Latin America, same high levels of informality in rural areas. So there, in Mexico, for example, the community service uses a van, and the whole public employment service is in a van and goes to the particular plaza on Wednesdays. That is, in rural areas, particularly when they're isolated, you really need to come to them. And without that meeting of where the local community meets in the rural areas, you'll never really be able to connect with them without that combination model.
Great. Now, that sounds a million miles away, but of course what we're talking about really is outreach. And outreach, of course, is becoming more and more popular in the global north as well. And I think one of the things that we touched on with Mr. Lee is around the fact that labor markets increasingly, or public employment services, are focusing more on employment and productivity as opposed to simply tackling unemployment, and that those require different approaches and different approaches to governance. I'm hoping that the responses to our question will be coming up fairly soon so that we can get an idea about what we're looking at. Yeah, so actually the majority of public employment services that have responded are of the classic tripartite model, which is very encouraging to see. That's at 65%, 31% or 32% top-down agency model, and 3% local community-based models, and 1% bottom-up local stakeholder models. I mean, Jacqueline made the point that really this is about now looking at more inventive approaches to engaging with unemployed people. One of the things, of course, that we have seen certainly in the European Public Employment Service Network over the last 10 years or so is this idea of the conductor public employment service. So the employment service isn't just delivering services, it's conducting the local stakeholders to also shape services. Can I just touch with you, Marie-Thérèse, first of all, that kind of model, that kind of need to reach out to very often disadvantaged communities through NGOs, through community bodies, is quite challenging. How does the governance in Le Forem encourage that, and how does it meet some of those challenges?
Nous sommes actuellement au cœur d'une réforme de l'accompagnement, pas l'accompagnement de nos demandeurs d'emploi, l'accompagnement du citoyen wallon.
Sometimes, or when we talk about support, when we talk about supporting job seekers, like we heard this morning, what is our logo about? It means or reflects the cycle of life. Indeed, we organize our work so that we would be able to reach out to people and offer them services that are relevant to them. And for that, we need to provide support services for job seekers, employers, but to the general public as such, so that throughout their career, throughout their work life, they could rely on us when need be. Now the question is, how do we make sure that we understand that we have a holistic approach, comprehensive approach, keeping in mind that all individuals have their own specific needs. We must have a clearly defined role in our organization for each member of staff, and there have to be links between these various roles and responsibilities. As people have their individual needs, there are also regional differences which we have to bear in mind. And of course, we also always try to work together with the local level in order to be as close to people as possible.
Obviously, Malaysia mirrors very much the rapid economic development that we see in most Asia Pacific countries. And we talked briefly this morning about the skills challenge. And of course, with technology changing very, very rapidly, youth in particular are facing an uphill struggle, very often entering and then progressing in the labour market. Can you talk us through some of the measures that you have been developing more recently to try and tackle the relatively high youth unemployment in Malaysia?
Thank you, Anton. In tackling this issue, I think you know, like now, one of the things that we Malaysian is facing, I think is obviously we are having an aging populations, and I think this will become more and more in future. So we are looking into this, and how we actually manage this is we will actually do a coordination with other agencies, the youth agencies and the Ministry of Youth, and we work together with them. We will actually craft what are the policies, what are the activities that we can actually do together to make sure that we're able to actually do a placement for them. So, placement of job is also been done through a complete process of matching within the job itself as well as the qualifications. I think this is being done through My Future Job itself. But what I would like to actually bring you more on, those are the things that placement that we actually do. Traditionally, what are the things that PES have been doing? But on top of that, we sit down together with the government, with the Ministry of Finance, with the agencies related to Ministry of Finance. We're coming out with incentives, how we can incentivize the employers as well as the employees, to be specific, the youth. Come up with the incentive to actually make sure that these people are being engaged and be recruited by the companies. And when they actually engage and we recruited this youth, then again they will get some benefit in terms of incentive to ease the burden of cost, pay and salary that they're facing now. So these are the things that we are doing together with the Ministry of Finance, putting in some incentive in the form of wage subsidization and so on and so forth, so that they can actually go to the ground and recruit these people. And at the same time, we put through the matching process within the My Future Job portal to actually identify this group of people and to actually make sure that they are able to have the opportunity of getting the chances of looking into the job interviews.
Thank you very much.
And
for that.
on top of that, Anton, we also sit down with the state governments, because in Malaysia, we are at the federal, but we do have altogether about 14 states, and these are small jurisdictions that we have within Malaysia. So we sit down with these states, try to influence and try to inculcate their labor market policy within the states, and at the same time helping them in putting in and establish satellites available within the states. Out of these 14 states, we have many types of different culture, and not to forget geographical area. So with those who actually have tough geographical area that we cannot actually reach them, we will be done through the effective coordination with the states. So those are the things that we are doing, not just the first part in terms of incentive, and then the second part actually in terms of reaching them through effective coordination and working together with NGOs as well as the state governments. So those are the things that we are doing in Malaysia to actually manage these youth issues.
Brilliant. So you touch on a really interesting point there about the dynamic between central and regional government, which is a dynamic I think that is also quite challenging sometimes for public employment services. Looking ahead, Peep, if I may come to you, we've got huge challenges, as we heard this morning, around the big transitions, which means that skills in particular are going to be at a premium. For the social partners, of course, there is that tension around skills, because, of course, one is talking about, in some respects, protecting jobs as a trades union, but also trying to look forward and trying to be nimble around the types of jobs that your members are able to train for, and the kinds of jobs that employers are looking to develop. Can you talk us through how those tensions in Estonia have perhaps emerged over the last 5-10 years, and then looking forward, what you see in terms of the strategic vision for the social partners?
I should start from the very beginning of what the story of Estonia. I went to Cuba 2 years ago, and me as a trade unionist, of course, I wanted to know how people are living there and what is with the income and how they manage and so on. They said it's 30 euros a month. I was shocked, like, yeah. But they're still living and they're eating, and then, you know, it is functioning. And then I started to calculate back what would be the average income back in '92, 30 years ago, when my parents and then all Estonians started to develop from scratch. It was also kind of 30 euros. So basically we have come from there. Estonia has actually decided twice for the economic development. First, breaking out from Soviet Union. It was to get this independence and to be like a proud nation. But the second part, it has always been there to manage economically well and catch up the West. This was '91 when we broke out from the Soviet Union, and 2004 when we joined the European Union. Again, first to secure the independence, but in the same time just to get really the goal of being among the Western world, also economically. And then so right now we are somewhere at 1,600 with our average income. We are not there. 30 years we came 30 years to this point, but we still have some 15, 20 years to go. And then the very clear understanding is that so our growth in incomes has to be like 3 times more than in the Western world. So 6% is kind of one thing which is and 6% in an income growth, it's a huge number, which means that we need to support invention every time we see it somewhere happening. So this is actually, and then when we are inventing so much and so fast, it means that all the workers have to be there. They have to be like ready for the changes. And then especially in trade unions, we see that, you know, this was not the case. Now we are developing also in Töötukassa these services that, okay, we are investing in some optical cables. It means that there will be less technicians needed in 3 years' time or 5 years' time. So let's start to work with them already so that they have a next career just ahead of them. It is not the best time being unemployed to start learning when you haven't done so for a long time. So I think this all lifelong learning thing is really much in the core of Töötukassa nowadays. But the Töötukassa can't be alone here. We are engaging the Ministry of Science. We are engaging the informal. We are engaging the on working place learning, you know, and combining it. This is the next kind of step that yeah, there's a huge class of learning class, I would call it, which is like really fast. You know, the officials and, you know, well-educated people, they are in the circle like really, and faster and faster. The problem is that the other half of 60%, which are not so active. Now the question is how to make the habit of learning in this part. But actually it answers all the questions of big trends: aging, globalization, green turn, and digital turn. So all these come back to this lifelong learning, and I think Töötukassa is one of the kind of places where actually the social partners could start it, because we had so much hands-on here, but it has to go actually further to all corners of society.
No, I think that's really important, and I think you've ending this conversation on a really positive note, that social dialogue is a key part of the process of meeting the challenges of the future of work agenda, and that central to that is going to be lifelong learning at whatever age, be you a young person entering the labour market or a more mature worker having to transition through the labour market. And of course, in terms of the global south, how you manage that informality as well, and how social dialogue can be, or how social dialogue and training are closely linked to that. So I think the key point here is that we know that there are a range of different models for social dialogue. We know that one size does not fit all, but I think clearly the lessons here are that social dialogue is a core part of a 21st century public employment service, and that there are some very kind of key ingredients to that, among them strategic leadership, a strategic vision, the ability to work with a wide range of partners, NGOs, the private sector, public sector, and by that I mean the municipalities in particular, the ability to use labour market information, evidence-based policy in order to drive strong operations and build trust, essentially, because at the end of the day, what we're hearing is that the trust of the institutions, trust of the public employment service is very much central to whether or not they succeed. And I think last but not least, a sense of continuous improvement, how all of this comes together in terms of the social dialogue to drive continuous improvement, so that in an age where we have LinkedIn, in an age where we have the consumer citizen increasingly challenging the way public employment services operate, it's important that public employment services use social dialogue to be the anchor, to provide the central public platform for the discourse that we see more widely in the economy. So on that note, Peep, thank you very much indeed. I would like to thank our wonderful panelists, and I'd like to thank the audience too for your for your attention. We don't, I think, have any time for questions, but we're happy to answer any during the lunch hour. I can hear gurgling and rumbling tummies going on out there, so there are some really hungry people, and we know never to stand in the way of a good lunch. So thank you very much again to our panelists, and thank you to you.
Thank you, Anton. You made a great introduction to our lunch break, which is going to happen now. And after that, you will have panel sessions in 3 groups and in 3 different rooms. Where are these rooms? You can see introduction on the screens and also in the agenda. And I will meet you here again in this main plenary room at 4:15. So have a great lunch.